You're joining the conversation with Shortlisted, a podcast from the Greater Midwest Chapter, or GMC, of the Association of Proposal Management Professionals. We chat about proposals, the business of winning work, and nailing the shortlists in our lives. I'm Paul Lockwood, Senior Pre-Sales Support Analyst for the Vitality Group in Chicago.
And I am Heather Finch. I lead a team of proposal and presentation specialists, and I am located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Today we're talking with Samantha Enslen, President and Founder of Dragonfly Editorial. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Sam?
Sure. Well, thanks you guys for inviting me to, for shortlisting me, if you will, to be on the podcast. Well, yeah, Paul, like you said, I run a company called Dragonfly Editorial. We are located here just north of Dayton, Ohio, but we work with customers that are all around the country and really even some that are sprinkled in different places around the world. I got my start in the proposal business when I lived in the DC area. I was out there for about 15 years and, found myself, like lots of us, falling accidentally into the proposal world. And then when I got married and started having kids, I convinced my husband to move back to Ohio with me, which is where I grew up. But I kept doing proposal work, and over the years, Dragonfly grew, and we added other disciplines. For example, now proposals is, I would say that's about a half to a third of our workload, but the other half to 2/3 is doing all different types of marketing communications. So we really help. It's a neat place to be because we see the entire sales cycle. So we're helping with create marketing communications like case studies or flyers or product brochures or product fact sheets. We're doing what they call thought leadership pieces, like we're helping customers write white papers and blog posts. And then, of course, helping them, ideally, seal the deal with creating their proposals. They're at the very end of that. So that's a little snippet about me. I have 3 kids. I have a husband. I have many cats and dogs. I'm not even going to give a number because it will possibly have changed by the time this goes on the air. So we'll just say that there are various animals that are also in the picture.
Well, at least it's a sunny day and it's not raining cats and dogs.
That is true. That is true. Yes.
So could you talk a little bit about your company and how it's grown over the time you've had it?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, when I convinced my husband to move back to Ohio with me, I really did not have any grand plans of starting a business per se. My greatest aspiration was, hey, I'm going to go back to doing freelance editing, and because I had worked in a corporate job when I was in DC. Hey, let's move back to Ohio. I'm going to go back to doing freelance writing and editing. That'll give us, some more flexibility around the house, and let's do it. And once I kind of put a stake in the ground and said that's what I was going to do, I was lucky that I found customers coming to me. I found over time more work coming into me than I was able to do myself, or projects that were too big for me to handle all by myself. And when I had my corporate role, I worked for Computer Sciences Corporation, and I ran the editorial group that was in their proposal shop. And in that role, one of my jobs was to hire all the different freelancers who might help us. So when I moved back to Ohio and started Dragonfly, I already knew all these great people, great writers and great editors. So it was very natural for me to just, reach out to them in my new role to see if they could help me with projects I was doing at Dragonfly. And so very accidentally, really, very organically, I just started taking on more and more projects, and then a little bit more and more projects. it's all a blur, but maybe 3 to 5 years in, something like that, my husband and I got pregnant again. So at that point I was like, yeah, I'm going to need a full-time person to help me at this point. So hired our very first employee. She was also I'm a copy editor at heart, you could say. She was also, and by trade, she was also a copy editor by trade, and kind of helped me run the show while I was taking care of a very little one. And then things just grew, really grew organically from there. We added employees kind of one by one over the years, and we hit, I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we hit some kind of critical mass, and we've grown a lot in the past few years. So we're up to 25 full-time employees now. We have designers, writers, editors, as well as a few support staff. And I don't know if we'll keep, how far we'll keep going, but right now we're just going.
Well, I mean, that's really an incredible story of growth and success. So there must be some secret to your sauce, right? So what is it that differentiates your company from both the perspective of somebody that's looking to hire you, but also from the perspective of somebody that's looking to work with you?
Sure. That's a great question, Heather. I think there's a couple different things that set us apart and that have set us apart from the beginning. One of them is that we just know how proposals work. They run late, they're really big, deadlines slip, things get extensions. So we're really used to just going with the flow. For example, lots of other marketing agencies charge what they call rush fees. If they have their standard rates, and then there's a rush fee if you have something that needs to get turned around quickly. I'm like, all of our work is rush. So, or much of it is rush. We just understand that that's part of the game. So we have always done our best to just, with our proposal clients and our marketing clients, to the extent possible, go with the flow. We've always been willing to jump in and provide evening support and weekend support. Again, that's because that's often when proposals happen. And we feel like we're actually providing a really helpful service, because we like to think that we provide that evening and weekend support so your staff doesn't have to. There's been a lot of conversation in the proposal world the past few years about mental health. And, are we burning all of our employees out, asking them to work 60 or even 80-hour weeks, week after week? Well, guess what? Get some outsourced help so your staff doesn't have to. I don't care if you hire Dragonfly, hire anybody. Get some surge support there in to help so that your staff can have a little bit more of a normal life.
And then, so the side of the staff that you're hiring, one of the things that you mentioned, 25 full-time employees. So, and even the first person that you hired was full-time. Now, I don't know a lot about running a business. I know just enough to know that full-time employees are harder to manage from a legality perspective, right? There's just more that you need to think about when you have full-time employees. So why did you decide to go that route versus a slew of part-timers?
Sure, that's an interesting question. Well, first of all, I'm not sure I would say that full-time staff are harder to manage. I think that I think it's just different. I think it's just a different situation. So I'll kind of walk you through what our growth looked like, and that might help to answer your question. So when we started out, again, like I said, for the first few years, I only used freelancers. In other words, everybody who I hired was a contractor. They came in on a 1099. And indeed, that's very clean and simple, I guess you could say. They give you an invoice, You pay them that invoice,
Mhm.
pretty much end of story. They're responsible for paying all their taxes and all that good stuff. So the kind of burden is pushed to them. What I found was that works. That's a very, for somebody who's interested in starting a business, that's a very safe way to start. You're not assuming any fixed staff costs. You are only paying someone when you need them to work.
Mhm.
You have a markup on their work, and so you're almost guaranteeing every hour they work, you make some money. Again, simple as that. What I found over time is that works well, but then there's a threshold when that stops working. When you have so much work coming in through the door, and so many different projects, you hit a critical point when it becomes more complicated and more difficult to manage the schedules of all of these freelance folks. Again, whether they're writers, designers, you're calling them, can you work tomorrow? Can you not work tomorrow? What's your schedule today? What's your schedule tomorrow? So like the return on you are all of a sudden your administrative load increases because you're
Yeah.
having to track down the schedules for all these random folks. So what we have found is that at a certain point, it's actually simplifies things
Mhm.
when you're like, I have a full-time employee. They're here 9 to 5. I know that they're going to be here every day. I can count on their work. And so all of a sudden that simplifies things. And so that's kind of how we have approached things over time. Grow using contractors to a point when that level of complexity all of a sudden isn't making sense. Time to hire another full-time person. Grow using our freelancers a bit. Oh my God, things are out of control. We can't keep track. Time to add another full-time person.
Your time is more free without the freelancers.
Yeah, exactly.
So to speak.
Now, yes, of course, there is absolutely risk that comes with bringing on full-time people. You're assuming, you are now signing up to pay a fixed salaries every single week. The employer is you assume more of the burden of the taxes. When somebody's a 1099, they're paying pretty much all of their taxes.
Mhm.
As an employer, you are paying a portion of it. We did not offer healthcare for several years. That just, kind of wasn't in the equation. So we brought people in, giving them paid time off, but we didn't have, for example, we didn't have a 401k, we didn't have health plan, anything like that. And then over the past few years, we finally got to a point when we're like, okay, I think we can start to offer that now. Of course, we think that creates a better environment for our employees and makes us a more desirable place to work. Again, as a small business, that's also costs that you're
Mhm.
assuming. But so far so good.
Just a lot of like strategy to those decisions and building the business and I always think small business ownership is this incredible thing because you have to know the thing that you're doing. So in this case,
Yeah.
proposals, which clearly, proposals and writing and editing, all of these things really well. But then all of a sudden you're tasked with like figuring out everything else that you have to do.
Yeah. That is so true. And that's been the great adventure for me is, like I said, I never set out to quote, run a business or, be a business owner. But after several years of running Dragonfly, I was like, oh, shoot, I do have a business. Now I better, and you can get so far on instinct and kind of just doing what makes sense. And then at a certain point, you have to figure out, okay, how are we going to systematize this? How are we going to start making decisions a little more strategically, not just on gut instinct? How are we going to put standard processes into place? How are we going to get the right people into certain roles? it's kind of like it's a long and perhaps never-ending process of shoring up all the different parts of the business so it no longer depends on me almost in any form or fashion. I should be able to, well, this sounds like a good idea. I should be able to go to Tahiti for 6 months and means nothing, nothing to the business because everything is there. There's smart people who are in charge of our different functions, writing, editing, and design. There's standard processes. Everybody knows what to do in different situations. There's operations people who are in the back of the house, making sure that all the invoicing and payments and kind of all the back office stuff happens. Yeah, that's the goal.
Okay, let's move away from the business side into some of the day-to-day
Sure.
kinds of things that you're working on. So one of the specialties you have, I understand, is like easy to read proposals and collateral. So how do you get the content from the clients? What happens when you receive stuff that may not be fantastic?
Yes.
I'm assuming that's kind of a common day-to-day kind of issue.
The commercials on TV where somebody used to be like, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV. That's kind of what we're like, where whatever your specialty is, whether it's engineering or IT or logistics, we're not IT specialists, we're not logistics specialists, but we partner with your subject matter experts who are. And so our job is to kind of like, for all of our projects, whether they're proposals or creating marketing and communications, one of our writers sits down with an SME, a subject matter expert in the organization, and just talks to them about their area of expertise. What do they want to communicate? What's important to share? We might review different types of collateral that they've created in the past, different proposals that they've submitted in the past, maybe different research reports that they've put together. And then our job is to get the ideas out of their head and onto paper in a way that's clear and easy to understand. There's kind of a whole science to creating content that's easy for a reader to easy for a reader to absorb. So the standards are kind of like, can the person easily find what they're looking for in a document? Can they understand what they find? And is it clear what they're supposed to do with that information? And the way that you get there has everything to do from how the content is laid out on the page. For example, I remember in my CSC days in the 1980s or whatever, our proposals were all just like walls of text, like pages and pages, and maybe a graphic here and there. What we try to promote now are proposals that have a lot more white space in there, proposals that have a lot more heads and subheads so the reader can easily navigate through the content. Best practice is to have often a graphic or a visual of some sort on almost every page. And then what I really like to dig into is the word choice and the word usage itself. A lot of the proposals that we work on are heavily technical documents. Might be aerospace, again, engineering, a defense proposal. And so necessarily there's going to be a lot of heavily technical jargon in the content. There's a lot of, to put it bluntly, there's a lot of big words that are necessary because of the content. So in order to still have that be easy to read and easily digestible, all of the other words need to be simple, straightforward, and to the point. So a lot of the work that we do is just, taking unnecessarily big words like utilize or remuneration or things and replacing them with simpler, more straightforward words. use instead of utilize and what have you. I tell a story one time about sometimes about when I was a kid. We had 2 different sets of Time Life, but do you guys know what Time Life books are?
Oh yeah.
Those like
Oh yeah.
sets that they used to have. We had 2 different sets of Time Life books in my house when I was a kid. One of them was about animals of the world, and one of them was about like fantastical and mythical creatures, like, you know, vampires, unicorns, ghosts, all this kind of cool stuff. So I read the animals of the world. I read that set, those sets cover to cover. And every single page, there was like 2 pictures. There were little snippets of text on the page. I just digested them and digested them. It was so cool. So then I went to the fantastic creatures of the world, which you would think would be more interesting. But whomever had decided to design this, it was just vampires, but it was just page after page after page of words and words and words and words. And at least as a, you know, young teenager, maybe at that time, I was like, I'm not interested. I don't have the patience for this. So even as a kid, I was seeing how easy, how much I was getting the identical information, the identical technical information, was learning the amount, but the way it was presented to me made it a lot more digestible, put it that way.
Thanks for that information.
Sure.
Thanks for the memories. Okay. Anyhow, we're going to move on to our next segment of the program here, which is the best thing that happened to us last month. Heather, what was the best thing that happened to you last month?
Ooh.
Okay, so I was seriously thinking about this one, and I came up with my thing, and then I realized how doubly appropriate it is. Okay, so putting that out in front to tell you the thing. So I am the chair of our APMP Pride Affinity Group, and we've been working on thinking of some ways to get really engaged and present for Bid and Proposal Con here in a few weeks. And I had this meeting with some volunteers that wanted to raise their hand and help out. So incredible talent: Rose Davis, Tony Davis. No relation, just happens to both be Davises. Mercedes Sensabaugh, Tia Bushinsky, and Annie Blumenthal Harbor. So thank you to all of them. They've come up with such great ideas and super fun stuff. So I'm excited for that. They came up with this fantastic tagline for Pride Affinity Group, which is "Be who you are. Pride is for everyone," which is just so sweet. But then the part where this all ties together and is doubly impactful is the reason that we're able to do some of this stuff and have the money to pay for things like printing and all of that is because of 2 fantastic sponsors: Strategy Horizon and Dragonfly Editorial. Yay. So Sam, thank you so much for your sponsorship of Pride. We're hoping to get some really fun, cool stuff that really helps to make everybody feel welcome.
That's great. Heather, do you guys have are there any special events planned? I know there's the affinity group meetings, but is there anything special other than that that's going on?
There will be some announcements coming soon.
Ooh, okay. All right. I can't wait.
Sam, what's the best thing that happened to you in the past month?
Well, this is stretching a little bit technically past the beginning of April, but my older daughter, she just turned 19. She has been traveling in Europe for the past 9 months. She's doing a program that is called WOOFing. That stands for the Worldwide Organization of Organic Farms. So it's kind of like a mini Peace Corps where organic farms all over the world register to be part of the WOOFing program. And then individuals from all over the world who want to work on organic farms can register to be a woofer. So Anna has been woofing. She's been in Italy, in the UK. She wound up in France working at just these like amazing locations. The farm that she was working at in Italy grew hazelnuts and buckeyes. Now, I don't know if anybody else here is from Ohio. I'm from Ohio. There are buckeyes. I did not know you could eat these things. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that they're poisonous if you eat them, but apparently they have a way of roasting them, and I think they turn them into some kind of paste or flour. Anyway, long story short, my younger daughter, who's 13, Tommy and I went over to England and spent a week with her over there. And it was just one of the greatest 7 days I've ever had. Just so wonderful to have a chance to spend time with my two daughters and sightsee and tootle around and eat tiramisu and croissants, and just really, really special time.
Cool. I mean, you wouldn't think spending a week with a woofing contractor would be something you really enjoy, but I guess it's a different kind of woofing than what is on top of this house. Best thing that happened to me last month, I'm in Toastmasters, international organization that helps people with public speaking, organizational skills. I've been in a couple of clubs over the past 20 plus years. One segment is table topics, extemporaneous speaking. Speak for 1 to 2.5 minutes on a subject that you were thrown out, like given immediately before you're supposed to start presenting. I participated in the club contest and won there. Went on to the area contest, won there. Went on to the division contest over Zoom and won there. So now the last level that I'm eligible for is district, which is pretty much all the northwest, western, and northern suburbs of Chicago, as well as I think some of the northern part of Chicago. And so that's the good news, that I'm able to compete at this high level in extemporaneous speaking. The bad news is it's iffy if I'm going to be able to make it, because it's at 4 o'clock this coming weekend on Sunday afternoon, and at 3 o'clock this coming Sunday afternoon, I'm in a choral concert here in Woodstock. So if I can get off the stage before 4 o'clock and connect onto Zoom.
Oh my goodness.
Then I will, somewhere in a quiet place backstage at the Woodstock Opera House, will be competing in table topics. Otherwise, the second place person at division will have to take my place. So crossing fingers that we can speed through the songs, but I don't think the director is necessarily going to pick up the tempo any more than we have. So
you can't sneak out for the last song, and
I think that would be frowned upon. I think there are 50 of us roughly in the choir, so odds are they might not notice me leaving, but I'm kind of in the middle on the 4th row out of 5, so making my way off the risers,
yeah,
might be a little obvious.
Yeah. Okay, so when you do the Toastmasting contests, do you know what topic you're going to speak on, or do they just give you a topic and you just have to talk?
You have to talk on that topic that you were just given. And
wow.
And it doesn't make a difference of what order you draw for speaking order. If you're last, if you're first, doesn't make a difference, because they keep you out of the speaking area into like a breakout room if it's online, or into another room if it's in person, while the other person's talking. So it's only when you come into the room and it's your turn to speak, then they give you the topic, they repeat the topic, you need to start talking.
Wow. What do you do if it's a topic you don't know anything about, like Germanic tribes of the Middle Ages or something?
Not usually that specific.
Okay.
You do have the option of changing the topic, but it's usually a pretty general topic that you can come up with something.
Got it.
So anyhow, time for Dear GMC. Heather.
All right. Well, as a reminder to our listeners, Dear GMC is your opportunity to submit questions to get answers from folks like us. So, Dear GMC, Lately, I've been disappointed with the quality of narrative I'm getting back from my proposal authors. Assignments arrive late and require substantial rewriting to be client facing. I'm talking spelling errors, grammar errors, flow errors, the whole 9 yards. How can I fix this? Do I need to train them to write better? Build extra time in the schedule to account for editing? Just accept that I'll need to stay up until midnight the day before the draft is due to rewrite everything? Help! Signed, Paige Payne. Well, it sounds like Paige has some pains. I think it's always interesting to me. We proposal managers, our first line of defense is, oh, we'll just take everything on and fix it ourselves. Yeah. I think we might have some better answers for Paige. So, Sam, is there anything that you want to start off with advice for Paige?
Sure, I'll throw a couple ideas out, and then I would love to hear what you guys' thoughts are on the same topic. I mean, one place that I would start with is have Paige, shall we just call them Paige?
Well, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
One thing I would suggest is to have Paige step back a little bit and assess the instructions that she's giving their writers. So, are they clear about what they are supposed to be writing about? Mm-hmm. Do they understand how their section fits in with the whole rest of the proposal and why their section is important? Do they understand basic things like, do they have a word count or a page count that they're writing to? Sometimes you'll have a great writer turn in something that's like wonderfully detailed 15 pages, and you're like, oh, I really just needed like a 2-page summary. Obvious things like, are they aware of the key themes and discriminators that they're supposed to weave into everything? So I guess that's question number one, is to step back and make sure that the instructions that you're giving the writers are as helpful to them as possible. Then I think the second question to me is to look at that content, look at what's being turned in and assess, is there a content problem or is there a cosmetic problem? In other words, if the substance of what they're turning in is not answering the mail, then you got a big problem. And a proposal manager or somebody else who's knowledgeable is going to have to dive into that text and revise it. On the other hand, if what you have is the content is pretty much on point, it's communicating the right messages and we're telling the right story, but like you said, maybe English wasn't their first language. Maybe they were in a rush. Maybe they just needed to kind of dump it down on paper. And so what the issues you're facing are spelling errors, run-on sentences, typos, some inconsistencies, things that are like hyphenated in one place, not hyphenated in others, maybe a little bit of like messy flow. In that case, you can bring in somebody who's essentially a copy editor to clean up the text. And then what you're left with after the fact is something that is ready to be submitted. So I think that's the critical decision. What I might do is go back and look at some of the content you've been receiving, past submissions from your authors, and assess which category that content is falling in. And like I said, if you're getting content that's substantially wrong, we got a whole nother problem here. If the content's there, but it just needs to be cleaned up, then I would build a copy editing round into your proposal schedule. And like I said, that's something that can be, you can find folks within your firm to help with that. You don't have to do it yourself. You can hire an outside firm to help with it. There's lots of different options to get that task done without the proposal manager having to burn themselves out by doing it.
if it's a cosmetic problem, I know nothing about cosmetics. So I that's not my foundation, so to speak.
I see what
Make
you
sure
did
that
there.
one goes on the joke counter.
Nice.
I didn't pass the makeup exam. I'm sorry. Any rate, question is there an excellent editor on your team who could, with sufficient notice, review the author's work for you? Editing is something I'm pretty darn good at. Do my coworkers all give me their work to look at? Not necessarily. It'd be great if they did, but you know, we're all working towards deadlines. Another thought is looking at what are some of the commonalities of the things that you're seeing. Is there something where if you spend an hour with the people who are having an issue, as well as maybe the others, so they don't feel necessarily singled out, that you can say, here are some things that I'm kind of noticing on an ongoing basis that we need to keep an eye out for. You know, we're very inconsistent on whether we're hyphenating this. We sometimes they're putting a capital letter in the middle of this, but it's really not. That particular supplier that we work with doesn't capitalize that compound word in the middle. You know, even just something as simple as use Grammarly. It's there.
Yeah.
Before you submit anything to me, run it through Grammarly. Look at everything that's popping up when Grammarly looks at it. And you know, trying to encourage versus discourage. Basically, spend some time in a one-on-one with each of these people, kind of going over how you've seen improvements. Maybe, you know, 6 months ago, I noticed that this seemed to be an ongoing issue. It's not so much now. Good job. You know, here are some other things we need to look at, but you've made significant improvement. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. It saves me a ton of time, saves whoever else a ton of time. So those are just my probably a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, and I think I mean with this kind of question, I always have a lot more questions to really understand what's at the heart of it, right? So a couple of things that jumped out to me is one, you know, talking about proposal authors. So what that means in an organization is different. So are these people SMEs or subject matter experts that have authorship as one of their roles, but it's not their primary role? That's going to be a different solution from this is a team of people who are dedicated to writing, and writing is part of their core task. So if it's a subject matter expert, you know, I think that's where you would be more likely to explore some of the things around adding an extra time for editing, finding an editing resource, and maybe even, you know, depending on the way that your company works, you know, if there is any standardized content that you can provide to them to give them something to start from, you know, those could be fixes that would work in that environment versus if these are people who, you know, are dedicated to writing, then that may be something that we need to get some training, depending on whether they report to you or they report to other people. Are these, you know, do you have a large group of writers and you get a different random pool every time? Are other proposal managers having the same challenges, right? Like you would want to have a better sense of the assessment of who's doing what. And, you know, this may not fall on your plate at all. Maybe this is just you need to go talk to who their manager is to better understand. One of the words that really stuck out to me was starting the sentence with lately. I've been disappointed. So is this truly a new problem? You know, did something change? You know, is the problem perhaps that your teams are swamped and that's what's causing the issue, you know, and that would be another you know, potential where you might want to bring in some outside help or, you know, raise that issue so the organization can decide if they want to invest in additional resources for that team. So there's a lot of different things that could be driving this. It's hard to really get at the core without knowing some of those details.
And for those going to Bid and Proposal Con, a pool of writers can be something entirely different at a resort as opposed to
And hopefully the dress code is very different, right? Like for those two pools. All right, well, I'll do a quick disclaimer just so that we got that out there. So a quick disclaimer and reminder, the advice offered in this podcast is intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. Use of this podcast is not intended to replace or substitute any financial, medical, legal, or other professional advice. This podcast, its hosts, and APMP GMC are not responsible for the outcome or results following any advice in any given situation. You and only you are completely responsible for your actions.
That's right. And if we're now on your final list of podcast favorites, we'd love to hear from you. Submit your Dear GMC question or any other question or suggestion to info@gmcapmp.org. To all those winning business out there, on behalf of me, Heather, and all of us in the Greater Midwest chapter, we'll GMC you next time on Shortlisted.